We've got a pretty big meta-shifting patch on the way with multiple ADCs being buffed and nerfed. There are 8 off-meta junglers receiving buffs, and we've got the brand new top laner Zahen hitting the Rift. As always, whenever a new champion is released, we'll hold off on ranking them until our mid-patch tier list, which drops next week, so that's where Zahen will get his first rating. With that said, let's break everything down and provide you guys with an update to the solo queue tier list for every single role in 25.23. But first, some hard truths. YouTube is built for the algorithm, not your LP. That means clickbait titles, junk food topics, and stretching simple tips for watch time. We're part of that system too, just like every guide and YouTube channel. And because every video is randomly surfaced to you as a singular guide and topic, advice often contradicts what you just watched. No context, no plan, more confusion. On our website at SkillCapped, however, we're free from all that, allowing us to focus on what actually matters. We teach in the most efficient way to really rank you up fast, with the same premium editing and challenger level coaches you see here, just without the algorithm's hoops. Start with our essentials courses for every role, updated for season 15. These are meticulously planned step-by-step guides that build your fundamentals in the right order. Once you've finished essentials, move into the advanced courses: deep dive wave control, advanced mechanics, the proven bronze to diamond climb paths, and literal world record jungle clears for each jungler, all structured so lessons stack instead of contradict. While you follow these learning paths, we also release our popular challenger walkthroughs, new sessions every week showing how to abuse the best meta champs for your elo, supported with an AMA section below each video, which we always respond to. We back it with a climb 5 divisions improvement guarantee while you're actively using SkillCapped, plus a 30-day refund change of mind policy on top of that, so there's literally no risk. Stop trying to mix and match random guides and start following a structured path far away from all the noise. Click the limited time discount link below to join SkillCapped today. So there's just one item change for this patch, and it's going to Sunfire Aegis, as tank junglers will see a small boost with the monster damage from Sunfire's passive going up from 160 to 200%. There aren't a whole lot of junglers running Sunfire at high rates right now, but Zac, Amumu, Rammus, and Sejuani are the few who can benefit from this buff. Top lane Rek'Sai is a pick that we saw emerge at Worlds this year, and Riot's going to be nerfing it for 25.23. Fury gain on minions is being reduced, going from 5 to 4, and then passive max health healing is dropping from 10 scaling to 20% to 9 scaling to 20%. So a decent hit to Rek'Sai's early laning with these changes, and we really don't think she'll be anything special moving forward. So B tier is where Rek'Sai will be placed on the top lane tier list. Mundo is going to receive a bug fix nerf to his E, where he will now gain the 1.4 times multiplier when he's missing 70% health instead of when he's missing 30% health. E passive max health to AD conversion is going up, however, from 2 scaling to 2.8% to 2 scaling to 3.2%. Mundo should land power neutral as a result of these changes, so we'll be leaving him in the top lane B tier for now. So top lane along with support are going to be the 2 roles that doesn't end up seeing a very big meta shift for 25.23. Jungle, mid, and ADC are all going to be way more exciting, so for top, we can just expect for Malphite to continue dominating as the #1 champ. The only more niche top lane champ who can look to benefit from changes this patch is Swain. Swain is picked in only 0.7% of games, but he does always have a pretty solid win rate, so with his E damage going up for this patch, he's definitely a champ to consider if you like those more hidden off-meta picks. Swain has been finding pretty good success against meta top laners like Sion, Garen, Cassante, and Malphite, so especially with Malphite being spammed a ton right now, Swain top is a really good champ to pull out in that matchup. Since a lot of your matchups when playing top lane Swain will be up against melee picks, you'll actually be able to abuse the E buffs better than in mid or support, so Swain top should actually benefit the most from the buffs. For Swain's tier list placement, we're going to place him in A as a good top lane pickup. So jungle is where we're going to find the meat of the changes for this patch, and let's start things off with Skarner. So Skarner ended up dropping to below a 43% win rate from his changes last patch, which is really odd considering he got multiple buffs, but the R cast time nerf must have been way more impactful than Riot was thinking, as it outweighed all the damage buffs he got. So in 25.23, Riot is back with more damage buffs as Skarner's AD growth is going from 4 to 5. Q cooldown is dropping from 8 scaling to 4 seconds to 8 scaling to 3 seconds, and then Q max health damage is up from 8 to 9%. So if Skarner wasn't the weakest champion in the game, then these buffs would actually look pretty good, but the fact he was a 43% win rate pick last patch means the buffs very likely won't be enough to bring him back into a viable spot. For that reason, we won't be moving Skarner up the tier list, as he'll continue to slot into the C tier. Alright, now we move on to the most interesting changes of the patch, as 8 off-meta junglers are getting buffed, starting with Aatrox. Aatrox will have his passive monster damage cap increased from 100 flat to 100 scaling to 320. Q damage is going up as well, as it will now deal 40 bonus damage to monsters. So if we compare the damage from 25.22 to 25.23, this is what we find. Aatrox in this following patch will be dealing over 200 additional damage from proccing his passive and using all 3 Q charges. So that is quite significant of a boost, and we wouldn't be surprised if Aatrox lands in a viable spot. At the same time though, we're gonna hold off on rating a few of these off-meta junglers on the tier list until mid-patch, because it's pretty much impossible for us to accurately rate someone like Aatrox when he's never before been viable in the jungle. Mbessa is is the second off-meta jungler getting buffed, with her Q monster damage going up from 125 to 150. So this only ends up adding 50 total damage when you use both of your Q charges, which doesn't really seem all that impactful at first glance. At least compared to what we are seeing out of Aatrox, he's gained hundreds of additional damage while Mbessa is gaining just 50. With that said though, Mbessa has actually been a somewhat viable jungler in recent patches, which is likely why Riot doesn't want to go too hard in buffing her. Aatrox is a completely unknown jungle pick, so they can go harder in buffing him, but Mbessa has had a 0.5% play rate as a jungler lately, which gives us a better idea as to where she'll land power-wise. We don't think the champ will be anything over the top, but an average B tier pick is where we can see Mbessa slotting in for 25.23. Jace jungle has a non-existent play rate in solo queue, but that is going to change for 25.23 because Riot's giving him 50 bonus damage to monsters on his Q in both forms. We can't really see this buff doing a whole lot for Jace in the jungle, so we're not going to be rating him on the tier list for now. Malphite jungle is going to be an interesting one to track for this patch, as his W will now deal 200% bonus damage to monsters. So with just 3 empowered auto attacks, we end up dealing over 100 more damage in 25.23 as opposed to 25.22, so this buff is looking pretty promising for Malphite. The fact Sunfire Aegis is also buffed could really help Malphite jungle out too, because that's likely the item he's going to want to rush. Looking at the data for Malphite jungle prior to this buff, it's pretty bleak, as he's played in around 40,000 games every patch and holds less than a 45% win rate. So the question then becomes, is this W buff enough to cause Malphite win rate to increase by at least 3%, which would put him in a viable spot? We honestly wouldn't be surprised if it did, but for the time being, we're going to place Malphite in the jungle C tier, and we'll move him higher for mid patch if the buff does land super impactful. Ornn is the next off-meta jungler receiving a few buffs, with his W active monster cap being increased from 155 scaling to 255 to 260 scaling to 500. W passive monster cap is up as well from 250 flat to 260 scaling to 500. So looking at the comparison clips, you're getting around 100 extra damage from a W into auto combo due to this buff. We have to keep in mind that Ornn W is on a 12-second cooldown though, so the fact that you'll only be able to take advantage of this buff every 12 seconds doesn't lead us to believe it will boost Ornn's power as a jungler all that much. So we're going to hold off on placing Ornn anywhere on the tier list because there's a good chance he just doesn't even become viable at all even with this buff. Riven jungle could turn out as the biggest winner from these off-meta jungle buffs, as her passive is now going to deal 50 bonus damage to monsters. So after every spell usage, if you weave in an auto attack, you're going to gain this 50 bonus damage. So looking at the comparison clips, using standard auto weaving in between each Q usage, you end up getting 150 added damage from last patch to now. And then if you were to throw in an E auto into W auto, that's a grand total of 250 bonus damage compared to last patch. Riven is similar to Ornn though, in the sense that we literally don't have any significant data on her as a jungler in recent patches, so it's anyone's guess as to how powerful she actually lands. The buff does seem really good on paper, but in the very limited sample of data we have for Riven jungle, she's been a 40% win rate pick, so even if the buff was massive and boosted that up 5%, she would still be relatively weak compared to the average jungler. So for now, we will be holding off on rating Riven on the jungle tier list, as we think there's a good chance she won't be viable even with the buff. For the 7th off-meta jungler on the buff list for this patch, we've got Sion. It's Sion's Q that will be buffed, as the bonus damage to monsters is up from 150 to 165%. So definitely nowhere near as impactful as a buff compared to what we saw for the previous champions before Sion. However, this is because Sion has actually held a pretty respectable win rate in recent patches at around 50%. So even though the buff is small, Sion could end up being the champion who finds the most amount of success in 25.23 out of all these junglers that are buffed, due to his 25.22 power level being much better than everyone else. So we're pretty confident Sion is at least worthy of an addition to the jungle tier list, and we think he'll be worth considering, so he's being dropped into the B tier. And then the 8th and final off-meta jungle pick who will receive some buffs is Fizz. So Fizz will be gaining some base armor, going from 22 to 26. Passive damage reduction against monsters is up from 4 to 14. W is now going to deal 60 bonus damage to monsters on hit. And then there's one nerf, with Fizz R cooldown being increased from 100 scaling to 70 seconds to 120 scaling to 80 seconds. So the jungle buffs do seem really big on paper, but one thing to keep in mind is that in his limited play as a jungler in recent patches, Fizz has been a sub 40% win rate pick. The buffs are big because Riot has a lot of room to work with to get him up to a more viable spot, and even if the buff added 5% win rate, he'd still be in a weak state. So Fizz is another one of those picks who we just aren't confident lands in a powerful spot as a jungler, so he's going to be left off the tier list for now. So if we have a look at the jungle tier list, we have a new addition to the OP tier for this patch, being Kha'Zix. Ka has been a big winner from the recent rune changes, as he's dominating with an inspiration primary page of First Strike for the Keystone, and abusing the buffed Cashback and Triple Tonic. Triple Tonic as a rune in general is super underrated right now on junglers who have strong level 6 power spikes. If you're looking to fight for grubs at level 6, being able to pop that elixir and gain either 18 AD or 30 AP is absolutely incredible and can make or break winning an early game fight at grubs. Besides Kha'Zix, a few other junglers you should consider running Triple Tonic on include Fiddlesticks, Gwen, Talon, Ivern, Naafiri, and Rengar. So as you can see, we've got got Mbessa, Malphite, and Scion added to the tier list, while Aatrox, Riven, Ornn, Fizz, and Jace are going to be left off for now because we aren't as confident in them becoming viable jungle picks. Nevertheless, this is going to be a really cool patch to track for jungle with so many off-meta junglers getting buffed. So moving on to mid lane now, we've got Ahri on the buff list for this patch with her W secondary bolt damage going up from 30 to 40%. So as we can see here, this ends up adding around 10 damage to Ahri's W. Not a massive buff by any means, but considering Ahri has already been a very good mid lane pick in recent patches, you could argue she doesn't even need this buff in the first place. So no movement for Ahri on the tier list for 25.23, as she'll remain one of the best S tier mid laners. We've got a Hui nerf on the way with his QE base damage dropping from 70 scaling to 350 to 70 scaling to 280. AP ratio is going up from 80 to 90%, but since Riot has these changes listed as nerfs, I think we can assume that the base damage nerf will just outweigh the AP ratio buff throughout the game. From the comparison clip, we can see that at level 9 with one item completed, you're losing 34 damage. So with this nerf coming through, we're going to drop Hui down one tier for this patch, going from S into A tier. Vlad is the one other mid lane champ who's nerfed for this patch, with his base health going down from 607 to 600 and armor dropping from 27 to 24. The nerf shouldn't be enough to sway Vlad's tier list placement, so we're going to be keeping him in S. Riot has some adjustments lined up for Mel, with her passive damage going up from 24 scaling to 99 to 24 scaling to 150, and passive AP ratio being increased from 9 to 15%. E-root duration sees a hefty nerf though, dropping from 1.25 scaling to 2.25 seconds to 1.2 scaling to 1.6 seconds. So what this likely does is sway players away from maxing E out first. 2.25 seconds all the way down to 1.6 seconds is such a big nerf, and to be honest, even if you're maxing E out second now, this will still feel really bad in the mid to late game. Even with Mel's passive damage getting significantly buffed, we wouldn't be surprised if she lost power for 25.23 due to the E nerf. For the time being, we won't be adjusting Mel's tier list placement, as she'll remain in the B tier. So for the mid lane tier list, we don't have any changes to the OP tier, with Morgana, Diana, and Naafiri continuing to lock down the 3 spots. Kassadin is being moved up into the S tier because of this newfound strength, with Inspiration as his primary rune page. The cashback and triple tonic buffs from last patch have turned out huge for Cass, and he's a really good pickup right now. Even though Fizz is receiving a few buffs for jungle, we are expecting him to land in a weaker spot for mid lane. Armor is up, however, his R cooldown is being increased by a whole 20 seconds at level 6, which is a pretty big hit to the early game snowball power of the champ. This is one of the biggest patches we've seen for ADC in a while, as there are 9 unique ADCs being adjusted. Jhin is first up, as his base AD is being increased from 59 to 61. Passive movement speed based on attack speed is up from 40 to 44%, and W damage will be increased from 60 scaling to 200 to 70 scaling to 210. So nothing too over the top for Jhin, but he has been right below that A tier threshold in recent patches, so we're going to give him the bump up due to these buffs. Miss Fortune's teamfight strength will be on the rise for 25.23, as her R damage AD ratio per wave is going from 75 to 80%. Especially with MF being able to abuse the recent rune buffs to cashback and triple tonic, she's looking to move into a really powerful spot for this coming patch, as we're giving her a push into the OP tier. Tristana is next in line for a buff, and it's her AD growth that will be increased from 2.5 to 2.9. So we're looking at a max of 1% win rate gain from a buff like this, which won't turn Tristana into the best ADC, but she'll continue to be a great S tier pick. Xayah's passive feather damage will see a boost, with the AD ratio going from 30 scaling to 50% to 35 scaling to 55%. Xayah has been teetering in between B and A tier as of recent, so this buff will solidify her as a good A tier pick. Zeri is going to receive a bit more mobility moving forward, as her R passive movement speed per stack is going up from 0.5 to 1%. Zeri has been just shy of an S tier spot in recent patches, so with this buff coming through, we're going to give her a push up. Moving on to the ADC nerfs now, Ashe is going to be losing some attack speed on Q, as it's dipping from 25 scaling to 75% to 20 scaling to 60%. So 15% loss at level 13 equates to a 375 gold loss in value. Considering Ashe has been far and beyond the best ADC as of recent, the nerf is going to hurt, but it won't drop her down the tier list very far, as we're moving her from OP into S. Caitlyn is the second ADC on the nerf list, with her passive total AD ratio going down from 60 scaling to 120% to 60 scaling to 100%. Not the end of the world for Kate, but with all these other ADCs getting buffed, her relative power will take a hit, and we think there's going to be a lot of better ADCs to choose from, so we're dropping Caitlyn from A into B tier. Jinx will be losing a bit of burst damage on her R for 25.23, as the base damage is going down by 50 at all ranks, while the bonus AD ratio is dropping from 155 to 130%. Nerf shouldn't take Jinx out of the meta, but it will remove her from the ADC OP tier, as we're dropping Jinx from OP into S. Kai'Sa is the final ADC who will be nerfed for this patch, as her base armor is going down from 27 to 25, and then R cooldown will be increased from 120 scaling to 60 seconds to 130 scaling to 70 seconds. Kai'Sa has been right between an A and S tier standing in recent patches, so with the nerfs being issued, she'll be more solidified in that A tier spot. So lots of moving parts on the ADC tier list for 25.23, as the OP tier is going to have a brand new look. Vayne has been one of the best performing ADCs for a while now, and is just super good good with Hexblade as a third purchase right now. So with both Ashe and Jinx dropping out of the OP tier, Vayne is getting the promotion. And then for Miss Fortune, she really didn't need a buff this patch as she's been a really solid solo queue pick as of late. So we think the direct buff, along with more players taking her buffed rune page of First Strike for the Keystone, along with cashback and triple tonic, should land her as one of the best ADCs of the patch. So it's no longer going to be Ashe and Jinx just miles ahead of everyone else, as Tristana, MF, Vayne, Zeri, and Jhin are all going to be on very similar power levels now and add a lot more variety to the ADC meta. Swain has become a pretty forgotten support, never being a top tier pick at all this season, so Riot's finally giving him a buff for 25.23. E damage is going up by 10 at all ranks, while E mana cost is being lowered by 10 at all ranks. So considering how poorly Swain has performed as of late, the buffs really aren't going to be that impactful, and we'll be leaving Swain in the C tier for now. This next change is going to more heavily influence the presence of Neeko in pro play, as she will no longer be able to transform into a cannon minion and proceed to tank a ludicrous amount of tower shots for her team. Instead, if she transforms into a cannon and ends up taking a tower shot, she'll immediately transform back into Neeko. So nothing that's going to influence the solo queue strength of the champion, but for the more coordinated environment in pro play, she likely won't be picked as much. So support gets the short end of the stick once again, as there really isn't going to be a considerable shift in meta for the role in 25.23. OP tier will continue to consist of both Nami and Melio. With Ashe and Jinx nerfed for this patch, there is a world where Melio loses a bit of power because those were two of his best synergies, but for now, we're going to keep him in the OP tier. We talked about Mel when covering mid lane, but she has played a decent chunk in the support role as well, so our outlook on her as a support is pretty negative too. Passive damage going up in exchange for a lower root duration just doesn't really seem like a good trade-off for support, because having that additional utility to lock enemies down for longer so that your team can follow up is likely more impactful than you being able to do a bit more damage. So we still think Mel will be one of the weakest supports for solo queue, and her tier list placement will reflect that, as she's down in the C tier. Alright guys, one last thing, our rank up guarantee is insane. It's like signing up for the gym and getting a refund if you don't get ripped. That's how confident we are in SkillCapped. We obsess over making the best guides with top players, rigorous testing, and top tier video editing to make your climb easy. If you're ready to level up, visit skillcapped.com and see the difference. So that's gonna wrap everything up for the 25.23 tier list update. Thank you all so much for watching. We'll see you back soon.